Hello. If you're watching this, you're probably thinking about making the Robin blouse. In this video, I'm going to talk about some design choices I made and why I made them. I'm also going to talk about how to choose your size, how to print out this pattern and put it together, and then how to do some pattern alterations to make it fit you better. I have another video where I detail the construction of the blouse, which you can find on my channel as well as linked in the top right corner. Let's get into it. Also, this video will be time-stamped at the bottom, so if you would like to skip to a certain part, feel free to do so. As far as design choices, I really wanted to make something kind of timeless and really wearable, something that I would just pull out of my closet without feeling like it's too costumey or too fancy or anything. Something that would bring a little bit of a vintage style and aesthetic and be easy to style in different outfits without being like I'm putting on a whole costume. I feel like you can style this in so many different ways. If you want to go really true vintage, I mean, it is a modernized vintage pattern, as in the design is inspired by vintage clothing, but it is entirely a modern pattern. I don't think you could wear it with a bullet bra. You probably have to do some alterations to the bust dart to make it work with a bullet bra. But if you want to style it more true vintage, you absolutely can. But you can also style it very kind of history bounding or even more modern. I feel like it could be kind of more masc or more femme depending on how you tie the knot in the front, or if you just kind of leave it straight and like tuck in the front like a French tuck. Yeah, there are a lot of options with this. So that was just kind of the general idea. And then as far as patterning, also I am wearing another version of it. This is made out of a blend checked fabric, which I also brought the shoulders out on this one as well as the coral one, which I will talk about later. And how to do that, how you might know that you need to do that. When I was developing this pattern, I really wanted to make this as beginner friendly as possible and have the fewest number of pattern pieces as possible, and to just be a really easy, really practical garment. So I decided to go with a plain front and back to attach the facing to the front, so that's one less pattern piece you have to cut out, and then to simplify the collar. So this is a one-piece collar. There's only one pattern piece. You have to cut out two because you can't cut it in the fold. The reason that I went with a collar like this versus having a collar stand and then a collar, which is what you would do for like a standard modern dress shirt collar or even a vintage dress shirt collar, is because that's more complicated and I did not want to be dealing with a collar stand, and I feel like that would turn it into more of an intermediate advanced pattern versus trying to make it more advanced beginner to intermediate. So I really tried to simplify it and just turn the collar into one piece, which means that this is not quite a true collar. Like you can't really, if you wanted to like put a tie on it, you could try, but it's not really made for that. So it does gap in the back slightly, which is one of the caveats of having a one-piece collar. Honestly, I mean, I think it's worth it. I made the design choice. I think having the one-piece collar and just the simplicity of putting it together is worth the fact that you have like this little tiny gap at the back of the neck. It's a very casual shirt also. I love the shape, and I think overall I'm really proud of this pattern, and I've never quite seen a collar pattern like this. So I feel like I innovated a little bit on that, which is fun because other than that, this is a pretty basic pattern. As far as just like general things, I wanted to minimize all of the complexity. So I did one dart, and it's a single vertical dart from the bust. It is made for like a mid to high bust, so if you have a low bust, you may need to bring the bust. You probably will need to bring the bust point down, which is pretty easy to do. Again, I will show you how to do that a little bit later. I also cut the armhole quite high, and this is just for practical movement reasons. If you are someone who has worn button-down shirts tied around the waist, you may notice that like they kind of are annoyingly pulling up when you lift your arms up. So I cut the armhole really high because I wanted this to be practical and to have the garment stay in place when you lift and move your arms. So you might find that when you first put this pattern on, it feels a little bit not quite uncomfortable, but you're like, why is it in my armpit? And you can alter it to have a lower armpit, but I think after a few hours of wearing it, you get used to it, and it is honestly much more practical, and if you tie it around your waist, it won't come up nearly as much as it would if the armhole was cut lower when you do things with your arms. I really wanted this to be something that I could live my life in and be active in and move my arms and do all these things, rather than being kind of stuck into a garment that is just for aesthetic purposes. So the hem in the back is short. That is another design thing. I wanted this to emulate a full-length button-down shirt tied at the waist, but I wanted to reduce a bunch of bulk because I know when I have used full-length button-down shirts and tied them at the waist. One of the issues that I've had is that there is so much fabric, especially with me being relatively short, like having like 8-10 inches of fabric bunched up at the waist can kind of ruin the aesthetic sometimes. And it's just a lot of fabric to deal with and it gets really bulky, so I wanted to have that sort of look, but to reduce the bulk as much as possible. So this only goes a few inches below the waist, and then when you tie it, that comes up and that just kind of, it's long enough to go a little bit past the waist and to kind of cover, like if you wanted it to cover and not show any skin, when you're wearing like a high-waisted skirt or pants or something, but yeah, it's not long enough to just have tons of bulk, which was the goal. Choosing your size. So what most people have found so far with this garment in my pattern testing is that going off of whichever one gives you the biggest size, either chest or waist. If you're between sizes, you can size up or down depending on which kind of fit you want, if you want a slightly more relaxed fit or a slightly more snug fit. So to print out this pattern, once you've downloaded it and set it to print, you're going to want to look for a setting that either says do not scale or scale and then set it to 100%. So on my printer, it has this sneaky thing where it automatically sets it to 110%. So I have to hit scale and type in 100. And my recommendation is to print the first page only of the pattern and look at it and measure it with a measuring tape or ruler and make sure that those measurements are lining up before you go ahead and print the rest out. You probably already know this if you make a lot of PDF patterns, but if you're new to PDF patterns, definitely make sure that you're only printing the scale page first. And the scale page is just the first page of the pattern. It is also, included in the pattern. It's not an entirely separate thing. But yeah, make sure that your scale is correct and just kind of play around with the settings on your printer if you need to get it correct. Again, it should say either do not scale or scale, and then you have to type in 100%. Once you have it printed out, you can go ahead and put it together. And to do that, you're going to need to cut off some of the edges. So there's a gray border, which goes right where the edge of the printing ends. And my recommendation is to cut off one of the horizontal sides and one of the vertical sides on every piece. You don't need to do every piece, but like most of them, so you can just go ahead and do all of them. I think I did the right side and the bottom, but you could do the top and the left. It doesn't really matter, but as long as you're consistent through all of your pages, you should be able to then go and overlap every page onto the one that is to the next side of it, if that makes sense. So you can see me here lining up the pattern and taping it together. I do recommend using clear tape just because it's easier to see what you're doing. And there are some little stars on the pattern to help you line them up. They have literally no other purpose than helping you to line up this pattern correctly. So you may have noticed, or you may have heard me already say in the other video, that this pattern does not include seam allowance. You are welcome to add seam allowance if you would like before you cut it out on paper. Just go around with a ruler and trace it and add whatever seam allowance you want. This isn't going to be possible on all of the edges of all the pieces on every size because I've placed them so close together that some of them, the seam allowances would run into each other, so you may have to cut it out and then tape on another piece of scrap paper and redraw the seam allowance. So it might be a little bit of a pain, but if you do like working with patterns with seam allowance a lot better, it might be worth it for you to just draw that in before rather than having to do it on your fabric. But before you cut it out, depending on what pattern alterations you want to do, you may want to do some before even cutting it out because then you won't have to tape on extra paper because there's already paper there. So let's get right into pattern alterations and how you might know that you need to do them. So the first alteration I want to talk about is for broad or narrow shoulders. So if you, like me, find that in pretty much every off-the-rack shirt that is supposed to be fitted, if it fits in the torso, the shoulders are too tight, you probably need to let the shoulders out. And you could probably just go ahead and do that before even making a mock-up because you already know you're going to need it. So to do that, you're going to take a ruler and continue the shoulder line off the end of the shoulder on both the front and the back. And then you're going to measure from where the shoulder currently ends, however much you want to add, and then draw a curve to blend that back into the armhole. Now, if you have narrow shoulders, if you find that off-the-rack clothing tends to always have shoulders that are too wide, even when the rest of it fits, you may need to take in the shoulders. You don't have to if you want a little bit more of a relaxed fit, but if you want the shoulder seam to sit properly on the shoulder, you're going to want to take it in. So to do that, you would do exactly the opposite, except you don't have to redraw the shoulder line because it's already there. You just measure in a little bit and then redraw that curve. So I recommend not doing this too much because it will change the size of the armhole slightly. That will make it harder to fit the sleeve in. So I recommend if you're on like one of the first two sizes, like size A or size B, don't do it more than about 3/8 of an inch. I did it a whole 1/2 inch on the coral colored blouse that I just made, and it was pretty hard to fit the sleeve in. So I recommend if you're on a small size, keep it at about 3/8 of an inch at the most. If you're working with, say, the largest size I have, size R, I would keep it to about 1 inch. And then if you're in the middle of the size range, you can try to keep it under 1/2, 3/4 of an inch. You shouldn't need to move it more than about that much to get it to fit. But just as a warning, if you move it more than a little bit, it may start to give you issues when you try to set the sleeve on. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to move the dart point. So if you, say, make a mock-up and you find that the waist is at the right height, but the dart comes up too high, all you need to do is lower the point of the dart. So to do that, you're going to find the center of the dart at the bottom and then draw a line going straight through to the top. So you find the center of your dart and then measure down however much you want to lower your dart point. Say you wanted to lower it, I'm going to exaggerate this, but say you wanted to lower it all the way to here. Realistically, you would probably be lowering it about this much, but for the sake of being able to see it on the paper, say it's all the way down here, and then you would take from right here in the center and draw a line to the widest point here on both sides. So from here to there, and then from here to there, and then if you need to, you could round out these little corners right here. Now you have the same dart width at the waist, but it starts lower. Alternatively, if you want to bring the dart point up, you can do exactly the opposite. Continue that center line up higher, create a new point, and then connect from there down to your waist points. I don't think many people are going to need to do that because the bust point on this is kind of medium to high, and also it's not a huge deal if it's just a little bit too low. If you're wondering how far from your bust apex the dart should actually be, it's around 5/8 of an inch. So if you're around there, if you're within 1/4 of an inch, you're probably good, but if it is way too low or way too high, you probably want to go in, draw your center line, and move the top of the bust dart up or down. And for this, you only work with the dart. You don't need to do anything to the rest of the garment. Next, I'm going to talk about how to lengthen from the shoulder to the bust. So if you make a mock-up and you find that the bust dart comes up too high, but the waist is also too high, so you just need to move the whole bust to waist section down and add room here, I'm about to show you how to do that. You can also figure out if you need this alteration by just measuring on your body and measuring on the paper pattern and seeing if it matches up or if this part is way too short. For this alteration, we're going to be adding distance from the shoulder to the bust, but keeping the armhole the same. So to do that, we need to draw a horizontal line that is above the bust dart, but below the armhole. And for this, you should use a triangle and make sure that this right here is a right angle. For the purposes of this video, I'm just drawing it in. But yeah, make sure it's perpendicular. And then the same thing on this one, it should be perpendicular to the center back. And the center back will have a fold line. Okay. There we go. So we have two lines cutting this pattern horizontally above the bust dart but below the armhole. And we're just going to cut it open, slash, spread, and add however much room you need to add. And we can cut this one. You may want to do this one at a time. You will need a scrap of paper for this. So then I have the front in two pieces. And we're just going to put them back together with space in the middle. So first I'm going to tape one of them down. Let's do this. And then measure, say you wanted to add 1.5 inches, you would measure up 1.5 inches and place your second piece. And make sure that this line is lining up perfectly. So then there we go. You can re-cut it out with the new little section. And that is our front piece. Now you do the same exact thing to the back. And of course, make sure that you're adding exactly the same amount of room in the front and the back. And there you go. Now you've added room from the shoulder to the bust. Now, if you want to add room from the bust to the waist, if you either measure on your body and your body is longer than it is on the pattern, or if you make a mock-up and you find that the bust dart is at the right height but the waist is too high, you can add some room vertically. So to do that, we're going to do exactly the same thing, except this time we are slashing and spreading in the middle of the dart rather than above the dart. It's a little tricky because this is now two separate parts. You may want to do this before cutting the dart out. Yeah, but I'm going to go ahead and cut this. Again, you want to make sure that you're doing a nice horizontal line that is perpendicular to either the back vertical line or the center front vertical line, but this is miniature and I don't care. For this one, okay, I will draw it for this one because I want to show you where to draw it. So I'm going to go, if you look at the dart, you can see that the waist is right here at the widest point. And then there should be this dot for where the bust is. So you can go right halfway in the middle. So halfway in the middle, draw your line. And then ideally this would be connected. I might just connect it with tape. Let's do that. So, oh, there we go. Now this is connected. You can snip. Again, same thing. You're just going to watch me do the same thing again. Spread it out however much room you would like to add. Make sure everything is, lining up perfectly. What's different about this one is that you have to redraw the dart. These vertical lines are just going to continue vertically. This one, you can kind of line your ruler up. If you have to cut off like a 1/16 of an inch of a corner, you probably will. Just kind of smooth out the line. Right here, you may have to cut off tiny corners or add a tiny corner of paper to smooth out this line, but it shouldn't be too much. But for the dart right here, go from the existing dart point to the waistline. So it's hard to do it precisely at this scale, but you can kind of see here the corners of the top dart are going to be too wide and the corners of the bottom are going to be a little bit too narrow. So your line is kind of going to go in between them. Now this pattern has had room added from the shoulder to the bust and also from the bust to the waist. Now if you want to do the opposite, take out room, you would do exactly the same thing, except instead of inserting paper, you would overlap the pieces and then redraw the lines the same way, kind of smooth out the outside lines. The vertical line should stay vertical and then go from your bust dart point to the waist and just draw a line there. Same process, either moving it apart or together. So now we're going to talk about taking the waist in or letting it out. So you have a few different options here. I'm going to start with taking the waist in, which I feel like isn't going to be super necessary. I honestly don't really recommend it unless your waist is more than about 3 inches smaller than the size chart. Otherwise, you can just tie the knot slightly tighter and you're good to go. Let's say we want to take this in 2 inches. So we're working on the half scale because this is half of the front and then this is half of the back. So we only need to take in 1 inch. And then we're going to split that between the front and the back. So that's ½ inch in the back, ½ inch in the front. So we'll start there. Find the waistline. Say the waistline is right here. And then we're going to measure in ½ inch and take a ruler, go from here to the waist, go from here out. And then you can round this out a little bit if you would like. You probably should. Round this out a little bit. And then you can either leave the front dart the same or you can take room out of the front dart as well. So if you want to just leave the dart exactly how it is, you would do exactly the same thing on this side. Measure 1/2 inch, draw a line, draw another line, and you're good. This is actually probably the way that I recommend doing it, but if you, for example, have a very large bust and you want to take in from the dart to increase the shaping of the bust, you can do that. So what I would do in that case is to only take this in 1/4 inch, split it in half, take this in 1/4 inch, and then the other 1/4 inch we're going to take from the dart. So there are 2 sides of the dart, so we have to do 1/8 inch from either side. So I would do 1/8 inch here, 1/8 inch here, and then redraw this. Just like that. So, as you can see, we took in 1/2 inch here, 1/4 inch here, and then 1/8 inch here, and 1/8 inch here. So that's just kind of evenly distributing the room that we are taking out from all of these different places. If you want to do the opposite, which I think a lot more people are going to need to do, because again, like I said, if your waist is a little bit smaller, just leave it. If your waist is a little bit bigger, you may want to actually add some space. So I'm going to erase the line so it doesn't get too confusing, but I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the opposite side. Okay, this eraser is kind of trash. But, so, if you want to add space to the waist, you actually have a few options. And also, depending on the size you're working on. So because of the difference in the fit model that I have for the first 12 sizes and the last 6 sizes, the pattern is exactly the same, the amount of ease is the same, the design is the same. I just changed the fit model slightly because based on the research that I did, it seemed like it would fit a little bit more people if I had a slightly different fit model. So on the last 6 sizes, the side seams ended up being exactly vertical, which means that if you want to add room, you probably want to take it out of the front dart. You can also increase the side seams, but if you're working on the last 6 sizes of my size range and you want to add space, my suggestion is to take it out of the dart first before adding space to the side seams. But if you're working on the first 12 sizes, you can add space to the side seams and the dart or just the side seams. So I'll show you how to do that right now. To let the waist out, say we wanted to add 2 inches more. And again, we're working on half of the garment, so that's only 1 inch, and then split it between the back and the front. We can do 1/2 inch in the back and 1/2 inch in the front. So mark out where the waist is, measure out 1/2 inch. Same thing on the other side. Measure out 1/2 inch. And redraw this line, and also depending on your hip measurement, you could increase this, or you could keep it the same, or you could go straight. It really depends on you and your body. Then we do the same thing here, and for the hem here, you can just kind of eyeball it and continue the line. You may have to true it up a little bit once you cut it out, but it shouldn't be too big of a deal. So yeah, the easiest way to let the waist out is just like this, at the side seam, to just add a little bit of space. But if you would like to also decrease space in the dart, you can do that by measuring in a little bit. You could do, say, 1/8 inch. If you wanted to split it again, you could do 1/2 inch here, 1/4 inch here, and then 1/8 inch on either side of the dart. So you would measure in 1/8 inch, in 1/8 inch, and then connect these lines to the top, to the dart point. So there you go. And say I could do this if I wanted to take it out. This is 2.5 inches. So if you did 1/2 inch here, 1/2 inch here, and then 1/8 inch on either side of the dart, that's giving you an extra 2.5 inches of space in the waist. And yes, it is a little bit more added to the front than the back, but you could probably work with this. I'll give you a little bit of a closer look at this. Added space here, and added space by making the dart smaller. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the sleeve. So you can make the sleeve 1/2 inch bigger super easily. Making the sleeve more than 1/2 inch bigger starts to get really tricky, so I'm actually not going to teach you how to do that. But yeah, you can make the sleeve 1/2 inch bigger very easily, and I will show you how. So you'll notice, if you look carefully, that we'll draw the line in. The sleeve is divided into two shapes. There's the main sleeve part, and then there's this rectangle that's added on. And this is actually a hem allowance, because to create the cuff on this shirt, you need to make a really wide hem. So I have the pattern set up so that you just add seam allowance at the bottom, and then I've already added the allowance that you actually need to fold up to create the hem for the sleeve. So to make the sleeve wider, all you have to do is go to the first 2 inches of the sleeve, approximately, measure out 1/4 inch on this side, measure out 1/4 inch on this side, and then draw a straight line from the armpit point down, and that should give you a completely vertical sleeve that stays the same width from the armhole down. And then just continue these lines. And there you go. So that's the sleeve made 1/2 inch wider. If your bicep is, say, 3/4 inch bigger than the size chart, and you're like, I just want a little more ease, you can give yourself that extra 1/2 inch. But other than that, sleeve alterations get pretty tricky because you have to start dealing with the sleeve head, and it's lots of stuff. So we're not gonna get into that. If the sleeve is way too small, I would suggest just sizing up the entire pattern, or you could take the sleeve from a larger size pattern, and then just kind of scoop out the arm side a little bit more on the pattern that you're working with. There are options. You could kind of hack it together. I have gone with a fairly big bicep measurement as my fit model, so I'm thinking that not too many people should need to make it a lot bigger. The last thing that I'm going to talk about, which I do think some people might want, is how to lengthen the sleeves. Now, you probably won't want to shorten them, because if you shorten them, it's going to start to turn into like a little almost cap sleeve, and I feel like that would just change the whole thing. But if you want to lengthen them slightly, you can do that, and that is pretty easy. So here we are. It's so tiny. If you want to lengthen the sleeve, I suggest adding length before the line where the cuff hem allowance is. There's no actual line there, but if you look at it, you can see the angle change. It's a very, very obtuse angle, so it's kind of hard to tell, but yeah, there should be a point where the angle changes right about approximately 2.37 inches from the end, somewhere around there. So to lengthen the sleeve, we're just going to do the slash and spread method. So draw a line like this, and okay, to make sure that this line is good, what my suggestion is to first create a vertical line going right through the center of the sleeve, and to do that, you can literally fold it in half. So fold it in half, and that will give you a center line, and then you can go perpendicular to that to create your, this line, your cut line. And then we're gonna go ahead and cut it. And then add some paper in the middle and put it back together. So let's do this. Let's say you have really long arms and you're like, I want to add 2 inches to this sleeve. It's probably going to look something like this. Then what would be helpful here is to draw in your vertical line on the paper so that you can make sure that you're lining everything up. On the sides, we're just going to smooth that line out. So we're going to go from the underarm to the point where that obtuse angle shift happens. So right here from this point to here, and from here to there. That was a little, okay. There you have it. This is your sleeve with length added. Yeah, that is pretty much all of the basic alterations that I think people are going to need on this pattern. If you make this pattern, I would love to see it. Please tag me or send it to me on Instagram or use hashtag Robin Blouse. You can get this pattern for pretty much half off by becoming a member of my coffee page, which is only $5 a month, but you can cancel at any time. Also, if you really want this pattern but you can't afford it, please email me at my email and I will just send you whatever size you need. My email is oraminglin@gmail.com. I hope people aren't like, oh, but I have to pay and they don't. Like, it's called equity. I just really want making clothes that fit to be an accessible thing for people, and I would love for as many people as possible to be able to make this. So it's also set up as pay as you want, and I have the pattern price set at a very low price for a full-size printable multi-sized PDF pattern. So I'm trying my best to keep it accessible, but yeah. There you go. If you have any questions, please ask me, comment them, or message me on Instagram. I will do my best to answer all of them. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!